And here we are. I didn't realize that preacher was going to go as long as he would this morning. Having to hustle to get over here to fulfill this commitment that I made. Well, good morning to you. Happy Easter to you. Oh, really glad that you're here. And I hope that you were with us for morning worship. Hope you enjoyed the message. Love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your cries of outrage, your fits of anger. I would welcome those. And kind of catching my breath a little bit. Service went a little longer. I did teach a little longer than I typically do. And then just fellowshipping with the worship team and realized, hey, I need to get over here and be about my promise, especially when hello, Mr. Buddy. Good to see you. Glad that you're there. So do you have any critiques on today's message? Hello, Dad. Good to see you. Miss Angela, good to see you. Glad that you're here. Thank you for your kind words. Appreciate that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate that. It's just been an interesting day, has it? I look outside and it's sunny, but it looks to me like it could rain again off to the west. So who knows? Who knows? Hello, my love. It's good to see you. Glad that you're there. I hope that you've eaten lunch. Miss Sylvia, good to see you. I hope that you're well. So, all right. Well, for those of you guys, I'm trying to think. I think everyone here is pretty familiar with what the game plan is here. Social stays just to really kind of just spend time together. And I apologize. I'm eating a cinnamon Jolly Rancher. Throat's a little dry after teaching, and my cup is dry because, like I said, I yacked and didn't get over here and get something to drink. So we'll suffer through that together. But today really had kind of a personal intention for me. As I was studying and thinking about the Easter message and Easter and all that entails, I inevitably found myself going back and thinking about my visit to the Holy Land and time with family. And I thought, I really would like to share that, I think, and talk about it and reminisce. And I thought I would spend some time with you guys on Easter and talk about the experience. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity. I'll show you a quick picture here. And let me... from the Holy Land. I guess I need to ask a question. Did you guys see that picture I just put up? I don't know if I put it in the right place. Were you able to see the picture of my family? If not, I may need to put it in a different place. But, okay, thank you, Miss Angela. Thank you. So I've had the privilege of visiting the Holy Land on 2 occasions, both with family, and so that makes it extra special. The first one was with my mother, my father, and my bride, and that was an exceptional visit. We stayed up in Haifa, which, if you look at Israel, Haifa is on the coast on the north end of Israel, up toward the Syrian border. We stayed there for the majority of our trip, and then we went down, well, actually up to Jerusalem, and spent, I think it was about 2 days in total there before we came home. My second visit to the Holy Land was a year ago, January, with that group that you saw there, all family. And we stayed right outside the old city, literally across the street from my hotel room. I could look out the window and see the city wall. We were outside the Damascus Gate. And so it was a very nice place to be. On the first visit, we stayed, it was a little bit of a walk from where we stayed, but not much. But the second time we stayed across the street. So let me say this about the Holy Land. Excuse me. I'm not going to fight that any longer. The Holy Land is a place that if you have the opportunity to visit, I encourage you to do it. Did I have to make a visit to validate my faith? Absolutely not. I didn't need it to validate my faith, but I can say that it put it put feelings and it put visuals into my faith that I'm thankful to have. Like one of them, you know, when the Bible says they went up to Jerusalem, it doesn't really think in our mind, but Jerusalem is actually on top of a mountain. So when you go up to Jerusalem, you really are going up, and with all the climate change and all the things that you would see. And one of the most dramatic changes that you'll ever see is if you're in Jerusalem on the mountain, the trees, the vegetation, and all those things. And then it's a short car ride down the mountain toward the Dead Sea. And when you reach sea level, there's a marker. It shows you sea level because the Dead Sea is the lowest spot on earth. And as you keep going down, the vegetation reduces. And then when you get down to the Dead Sea, you've seen pictures. It's like a moonscape, except for the little oasis that is Jericho, and then the greenery along the Jordan River. So it's an incredible place of comparison and contrast, you know, and to see the Sea of Galilee in person, it was really an interesting thing because it's not a huge place, but a huge portion of the biblical narrative happened in and around the Sea of Galilee. And then the national sites, the historical sites are wonderful to visit. Now, I will say this, one of the challenges to visiting the Holy Land is looking beyond the tourist trap. Now, all of the historical sites were bought or are under the authority, ownership of churches. And so the churches are there, and there's religious, you know, efforts and and things going on, but then also there's people trying to make a living, you know, selling this and that and the other, and that gets to be a little bit of a beat down. I'm not going to lie to you, but when you understand that this is the way that they make money, and they're not trying to cheapen your experience, they're not trying to cheapen the gospel and the biblical account. They're just trying to make a living like you and I would want to make a living. And so there's plenty of shopping. There's plenty of opportunity to buy in and around the old city, especially, and in the nation of Israel. And they see you coming. I mean, they can tell you're a tourist pretty easily most of the time. So that being said, I wanted to kind of share specifically about the places and the experiences and the thoughts of the events that specifically to Easter. Now, to visit the ancient city of Jerusalem is an incredible experience. It's like stepping back in time. The city wall is still intact, and you come through an ancient gate, and it's narrow, and you walk in, and when you step through that gate, it literally takes you back centuries. And it's a powerful thing. The city is divided into quarters. There's the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Christian quarter. So the city is divided into quarters, and they're very distinctive. You can visit all four quarters, and while you're in there, one of the neat things is it's a very unique experience. Each one has a different feel. There's different attire that is worn. For instance, one of the funny experiences, my bride and I were out walking, and we were in the Muslim quarter. And in the Muslim quarter, the ladies cover their heads. It's expected. And an individual walked by and spat at my bride's feet in his displeasure that her head wasn't covered. And so we bought her a head covering, and she covered. And I will say this, she looked beautiful. I said, we may need to stay with this look. And my bride said, no. So we haven't stayed with that look, but she looked awesome. And as a matter of fact, one of my absolute best memories, it was an evening time, and my bride and I were strolling through the old city, and we happened to be in the Muslim quarter, and we slipped into this little cafe and had dinner. We were the only two there, so the proprietor treated us like royalty, and it was just a night I treasure. Just holding my bride's hand, walking through the coolness of the evening in an ancient city, and it was just something really special. I'm thankful I have that. So the city is divided into four quarters, and each of the holy sites are under the authority of one or more churches. And, they're doing their thing, and you get to deal with them. And like I said, you have the tourists, you have the salespeople. And if you can distance from that and just kind of deal with it, it makes it a lot easier. So let me just kind of walk you through my experience. So coming in the Damascus Gate, when you come off the city street through the ancient wall, at the Damascus Gate, there's two streets. One goes up and to your right, the other one goes down and to your left. And depending on which one you go into the Christian quarter, or you go down into the Muslim quarter. If you go to your left, you go down through the Muslim quarter, and if you just simply stay on that street and keep walking, you will walk directly into the Wailing Wall area, the Western Wall area, as you may know. Now, when I say streets, what's really important is it's not like a street like we think of. The stones are ancient and big, and the street could be, trying to think, at its widest, it would be about a car width plus a half, maybe, because you'll see some small cars in there, and that's crazy. You'll see push carts in there, and you got to pay attention to where they are, because they'll just smooth run you over. You'll see motorbikes every now and then in there. But if you come into the gate, and if you want to start the Via Dolorosa, the Way of the Cross, you take the left-hand street, and you would go down, and it's about halfway between the gate and the Western Wall. There's a street up and to your left, and if you go up that street is where Pilate's Court is located. So that is the beginning of the Via Dolorosa, and you can go in there, and you have to go underground. You have to understand that the strata from the time of Christ is now about 20, 30 feet below the current street level. So to get to the time of Christ, you actually go down. And on my second visit, I had a chance to to be a little more thorough as far as visiting in the ancient city. And one of the things that I got to see the second time was we went down into the jail in Pilate's court, and you can go down and you can see where chariots wore grooves in the stone as they came in and out. You can see markings in the stone where they would carve in like a game board. And so that was okay, Dad says 20 feet wide at best. Yes, that's true. Hello, Jay. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here. But one of the things that I got the chance to see for the first time that I thought was really amazing was you go down into the jail and there's this large carved out area. It's basically carved out into the stone. And along the wall, you can see where they would have attached shackles where they could shackle you to the wall. And so this was a large area. And then they went over to a smaller area that they had dug out. And history tells us, now they say that a lot there, history or tradition tells us, because obviously no one's alive who was there at the time of Christ. But tradition tells us that in this cell is where they kept Christ. Now, I've not been there before, and in this cell, it's a one-person cell. And what was so interesting to me is this. So the person would be put into the cell, and they have carved out a bench with leg holes. And so the person would sit on the bench, put their feet through the leg holes, and their feet would be shackled around this stone bench. And then to either side in the wall, you can see grommets where shackles would have been attached to the wall. So Christ would have been sat on the stone bench, feet through the seat, chains around each feet, around the stone part of the bench, and then shackles on each hand on each wall. And I thought to myself, how interesting it was that they would go to such extents for a man. Now, you and I understand he's more than just a man. He's all God and he's all man. You and I believe that by faith. It's what the Bible says. But for the Romans, who quite honestly dismissed the God of the Hebrews, and for others, I found it amazing the extent that they went to under the guise of security, how they treated him almost like a supernatural individual, but they thought of him as just another crazy Jew, if I can use that phrase. And so it was really interesting to me, and I had the opportunity to sit there and just kind of ponder what that must have been like as Jesus submitted himself to the persecution of the Romans and the Jews during his passion. And so to see that, and then when you come back up and you come out to the street, that is the official beginning of the Via Dolorosa. And so as you come out of Pilate's court, you would take the street to your right, and you're going back down the hill to where you've already come from. Now, the interesting thing at this corner, when you get to the street corner, the one we came in on and the one we walked up to go to Pilate's court, when you come to this corner, there's a few things there that are very interesting. One of them is that is a cafe, which is a very highly regarded location of my father. It makes some of the greatest lemonade you will ever put in your face. And my dad enjoys watching people. So we would sit there and we would dine and watch people. Another interesting part about this corner, which is another station on the Via Dolorosa, but it's also a guard station. There's one thing that you will not run out of seeing, and that is security in Israel. Basically, everyone who's ever lived over the age of 18 have served in military duty, and so they're either on duty or in the reserves. Everyone knows how to carry weapons, and so they are on duty. And I remember I remember one day I was sitting there with my sisters watching people walk by, and there was this large collection. I remember it was about 12 or 14 military and police gathered, 14, 15, 20 feet away from me. And I thought to myself, if someone wanted to do something really bad, right here would be a great place to do it, because there's the confluence of streets. There's a large gathering of people. There's a large gathering of security personnel. And I thought to myself, this would be the perfect place for someone to do something really bad. And I leaned over and I mentioned it to my sisters, and their eyes opened wide. And I said, well, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry, because if someone chose to do that, you'd never know it happened. They didn't find it as humorous as I did. But I thought to myself, if someone chose to do that, the safest place is to be in the center of God's will, and that's where I am. And to sit and to sip lemonade in one place and then to wake up in the presence of God in a second place, that would be pretty exciting. So you have the restaurant that my father enjoys. You have the gathering of security people. And then the third thing, and quite truthfully, the most interesting thing about this particular corner, the third station, is there in the street, they've excavated down to the time of Christ and brought up the paving stones to current street level. And so what that means is that when you walk on that particular section of stones, you are walking on these stones that Christ would have walked on as he carried the cross to Calvary. Now that's a pretty amazing thing to have this sense of being in the same place that Christ was. It's a pretty powerful thing. And I love that corner. And I have to say, it's one of my favorite places to sit and just watch the world walk by. So as we leave the third station, you go further down the street towards the western wall, just a little bit, and the road will turn back to the right, and it starts up a steep hill. Now, when you start up the steep hill, this is, I can't remember the name, but it's kind of the main street. And currently, today, it's simply lined with shop after shop after shop after shop. Just anything and everything. Spices, fabric, perfumes, just anything you'd want. It's an amazing thing. But as you start walking up this hill, it's a laborsome thing. And when you start to think about all that Christ had been through leading up to the carrying of his cross, the physicalness of going up this hill, it causes you to pause for sure. And then when you reach the crest of the hill, you would turn right. And when you turn right, it takes you toward the Christian quarter. Now, when you turn right and you go, here's where there is a debate occurs. I don't know if you know, but in Israel, there is a debate. There is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which Catholic tradition says is the place of the crucifixion and the tomb of Christ. Now, there's a church built over it, and it's ornate, and it's enclosed, and so it takes a little imagination to be able to see what it might have been. But if you go down this street, you come to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we're going to walk in there first, and then we'll take another little journey, and we'll leave it up to you to consider, okay? So when you walk into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, first of all, there's a courtyard. So there's a couple of things in the courtyard, three things that stand out in my mind. One is over to the left, there's this metal sphere standing on a metal stand, and it has a door on it. It looks like a diving bell, if you can imagine back in the day, they'd put you in this steel ball and they'd lower you like that. But it's, it's smaller, obviously. And so your first thought is, well, what is that? What that is that is a bomb detonation site. If someone were to find a package and it happened to be a bomb, they would put it in there and detonate it, and it's built to withstand the blast of the bomb. So it helps you remember that the Lord is watching out for you, but you need to be aware of what bad guys might do. And so that's a very interesting thing to see. You don't see those in America. And then if you look at the doorway going into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there's a ridge above it, and on that ridge there's a step ladder. Now, it's two rails with horizontal rungs tied to it, and I'm trying to think. I think it has 5, maybe 7 rungs, and it goes up to a window, and there's some windows up there. Now, yeah, I'm getting to that story, Dad. That ladder has a very interesting history to it. Now, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there are 4 churches that claim partial ownership over this real estate. One being the Catholic Church, and off the top of my head, I can't think of the other 3. But they don't all necessarily get along all the time. In fact, when you're in the building, they will systematically take laps around the building. So, one faith group is at this corner, and the other faith group's at that corner, and the other corner, and the other corner, and they will systematically walk as to keep distance between themselves. I know it's kind of ridiculous, but that's what they do. And there's actually been tension between these 4 faith groups who are supposed to all be a part of God's family, to the point where physicality is broken out. People have been sent to the hospital. Well, 50 years ago, that ladder was placed up there. And whoever put it up there, for whatever reason they put it up there, no one seems to recall. And so the challenge is this: the ladder has been left in place for 50 years out of fear of taking it down and offending someone and causing a disturbance at the site. Now, that makes me chuckle on a lot of levels, that this ladder has been left in place for 50 years. And just it's a terrible testimony to Christians that we can't get along enough to take down a ladder. And then the third story that comes to my mind outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was the last time that I was there, or the time before last. I was able to travel with my bride and my parents. My mother was there. And my father has taken a picture of my mother on a step outside the church on 3 different occasions, or 2 different occasions. And so he took a picture of her when my bride and I were there with her. And sadly, she was promoted to heaven between my 2 visits. And so this particular morning, we were going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I was waxing sentimental. And there's a wooden ramp. ADA does not apply in the Holy Land. Just understand that. But there's a ramp. And the last time I was there, my father and I helped my mother down that ramp so that she could have that picture taken. So I thought to myself, I was going to walk down that ramp just feeling, a little emotional. And in my mind, I thought it may not be a great idea because it was damp. It wasn't raining at the time, but it was damp. So I stepped onto that ramp with my hands in my pockets, and immediately my feet came out from underneath me, and down I went. Now, there's video that doesn't show me falling, but you hear it. and the camera quickly comes around and finds me post experience, and my pride was bruised, and more than that, I think my body was bruised. And if I'm being completely truthful, I think I'm still dealing with some residual effects of that particular event. So when I think of the courtyard of the Holy Sepulchre, there's a lot of memories attached to that space. That being said, let's step into the church. When you step into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there are, four sites that you can see inside this one building. When you step in, if you go to your right, there's staircase. The staircase goes up, and when you get to the top of the staircase, now you have to remember, as all these places are enshrined, so there's ornate candles and paintings and all sorts of things. Now they're beautiful. And like I said, it can overwhelm, kind of what you're there for, but it's okay. It's beautiful. Just take it for what it is. But up there, you can, if you want, you can get down on a knee and you can lean in, and they have the site that tradition says is where the cross was placed. Their tradition says that this is where Golgotha was, that this is where the cross was placed into the ground, where the crucifixion took place. Now you come down off of those steps, and you go a little further where there's a slab, and tradition says is that's where they laid him before placing him in the borrowed tomb. And you can be there, and people pray there and touch it and all these sort of things. Now, if you're to go to the right and down a staircase, the Bible tells us, and tradition tells us, about a cistern or a well where the cross of Christ was tossed into. Well, if you go down there, that's what they say, tradition says, occurs down there. And one of the neat things about walking down there is down the staircase and around the hallway, you can see Crusader crosses carved into the stone, going all the way back to the time of the Crusaders. But if you continue on around, there is a large open room with a smaller structure in the middle of the room, and that is what tradition says is the tomb, the sepulcher. And you can go into the sepulcher, and it's a small room, and then you go in, and there's a smaller room. The smaller room is what their tradition says is the actual tomb where Christ's body laid for the 3 days prior to his resurrection. Now, it's an incredible place. It's beautiful. It's emotional. It's all those things. That being said, there is a debate. There is a discussion. Because if you continue out through the Christian quarter and out of the gate, the Herod's Gate, and you go outside the old city and across a busy street and up and to the right, you come to a location called the Garden Tomb. Now, the Garden Tomb is held as the tomb of Christ. So in Jerusalem and in the big tent of faith, there is a debate over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the Garden Tomb. Let me simply say this. 1, is they're both empty. 2, Jesus is resurrected. And 3, it leaves it open to faith. So the Garden Tomb experience is a completely different experience than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. When you walk into that area, they've worked very diligently to keep it very garden-esque. There's trees and there's flowers and there's birds. And I just have to say, for me, when I think of the tomb and I think of the garden and I think of the Easter story, the Garden Tomb fits for me. This is what I think it would look like. This is what I would experience if I were a part of that first Easter morning. And I just, when I think about it in my mind's eye and I think about the process, it fits for me. So for me, the Garden Tomb is the tomb for me. But you can go there, and as you walk around, you'll see that this tomb is carved into a stone hillside. And when you get there, it's a very simple place with a small door. The door used to have the carved out door. They used to have a wooden door on it. They took it off for some reason. I don't remember. They explained it, but I forgot. But you can see the grooves where the stone that would be rolled to seal it would have gone. There's a small notch carved out at about 10 feet high going into the tomb. And the purpose of that, quite simply, is for ventilation, so that the tomb can vent itself. And so when you step into the garden tomb, there's a small entryway, a small commons area, and then immediately to your right, and it is secured, there's a gate, you can't go in there, but immediately to your right, there's two carved out slabs, which fit the purposes of the tomb, because in the time of Christ, a family would create a tomb, and when someone passed, they would lay them to rest in the tomb, and then nature would take its course, and in due time, they would go in and they would collect what remained, and they would place them in a bone box, and they would be kept in that. So the tomb was a waypoint of the process. But tradition says, and the Bible tells us, that on the day Christ was crucified, it was late in the day when he surrendered his spirit to the Father. They took him down off the cross, and they quickly wanted to lay him to rest so that they would not be considered ceremonially unclean. And so they found a close by tomb, a unused tomb. And so tradition says that this is that tomb. So why does that seem to be a logical location? So if you walk on around the tomb area and you walk up a slight incline, and there's an observation deck. From this observation deck, if you look down, you get to see the very unpicturesque parking lot for a bus terminal. It's a very surreal thing. If you're a person of faith and you believe this is what it is and what the Bible says occurred here, that right here under the shadow of Golgotha is a bus terminal, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people every day shuffle in and out of the shadow of the cross. That being said, if you look up, there's a hill. This whole area in the time of Christ would have been a stone quarry. This would have been a logical place for them to hold executions for a lot of reasons. But when you look at this hillside, one of the reasons it was called Golgotha, or the skull, was because they said when you looked at it, it looked like a skull. And when you look, you can see it if you look. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. But it's up there that tradition says and history says was where Christ was crucified. So we have this debate, and it's okay, but it makes a geographic sense that they're outside the wall, they're outside the city. If he was crucified there, this tomb is not only physically close, but it's prepared. So the narrative seems to fit. So both tombs are empty. Both are beautiful and spiritually touching in their own right. And then if you sit and you allow yourself to begin to think about that first Easter morning. Now, let me just use my phone. So if this is the city of Jerusalem, okay, and let's say the garden tomb is here, the upper room is down here. Yeah, kind of down here. So we know that the followers of Christ were hunkered down in the upper room. Like I said in the message earlier, dealing with fear and uncertainty, wrestling with faith, I mean, that would have been a very sad and scary, heartbreaking Saturday night. Thursday night, you're in the upper room with Christ and he's serving you the Lord's Supper and all that entails. Saturday night, he's been heinously crucified and is dead, and now everything is up for consideration and discussion. But on Sunday morning, the first day of the week, the ladies had gotten together. They were prepared to go and officially and formally and fully prepare Christ's body for burial. Now, what's amazing is they did this out of faith and love and compassion. They didn't go to the tomb expecting him to be alive. They went to the tomb expecting him, anticipating him to still be where they had laid him. And on top of that, they went to the tomb knowing they were going to need help getting into the tomb, because the stone that was rolled in front of the sepulcher, they say, was probably somewhere between a 1.5 tons to 2 tons. So a small gathering of ladies to move the stone would be absolutely physically impossible. So they went there out of faith. They went there out of love and compassion. But the point is they went. And when they arrived there, not only were the Roman guards not there that had been placed, but the stone had been moved from its location, not just rolled away, but physically moved from its location. Something that only God could do. And so when they arrived there, I imagine in my sanctified imagination what that must have been like. It wasn't anything like they expected it to be. And then to gaze into that borrowed tomb and to not see the body of Christ wrapped in the shroud that they had quickly placed him in, but to see an angel declaring his resurrection would have been breathtaking. And you can see with your imagination those running back down the hill, if not through the city, around the city, to tell the disciples what they had seen. And then Mary being in the garden and encountering Christ on a personal level would have been incredible. Did I have to go to Israel to validate my faith? Absolutely not. The tomb is empty, was empty, and will be empty. But to have the opportunity to walk, to see, to smell, to ponder, and to pray was priceless. It really was. To be able to share it with family, to say that my Easter experience is different wouldn't really do it justice. And I know that my dad is here, and I want to say thank you to my father and my mother for giving me that. I never really purposed to go, but to have the privilege to visit the Holy Land with my parents and my bride, and then to go back and spend it with a portion of my family is a gift of a lifetime. And it has enriched my faith, so that when I think about communion and I think about the upper room and I think about these places in the biblical accounts, there's more. There's more to me. There's more. And so to have the opportunity to walk the Via Dolorosa, to visit the tombs, to think through the events of that weekend is transformative. And I can't encourage you enough. If you ever have the opportunity, you should take it. Israel's a beautiful place. Are there risks? Sure. I mean, we're not going to lie. But there's a risk with everything that you do. I don't know if you realize this, but there's a thing called coronavirus. And so everything that you touch and every person that you're around comes with a risk. We don't think about those risks until days like these. Well, the risk of visiting the Holy Land, is well worth it. It's a secure place. And like I said earlier, the safest place you and I can ever be is in the center of God's will. And if he makes a doorway available to you and you step through it, I actually thought to myself, if something were to occur to me, like sitting at that corner at the third station of the cross, I thought, well, how wonderful it would be to transition from this life into glory from the ancient city of Jerusalem. It'd be pretty sweet. I will tell you one other story that doesn't really include the tomb, but it's a story that is very meaningful to me. On my first visit, it was the third night of Hanukkah. Now, Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday. It's the holiday of lights, and I encourage you to go read about that. But Hanukkah is a big deal. And I have Jewish friends of mine who gave me my own prayer shawl and my own yarmulke. I actually thought about putting it on for this visit. Probably should have. I look pretty nice in it, by the way. Thank you, Nolan. And so I had taken my prayer shawl and my yarmulke with me for the express reason of visiting the Western Wall. The Western Wall is the remaining portion of the temple. It is where Jews come to physically connect with their faith. It's a powerful place. It's a poignant place. And I wanted to make a visit to that place. And so we arrived in Jerusalem a little late in the afternoon, and my mom and my bride were in for the evening. So my father and I took a stroll. And we walked into the city through those gates, and we took the street to the right, and we made our way up to the Jewish quarter, and we come out above looking down at the Western Wall. And to say that there was a celebration going on would be an understatement. I mean, the sights and the sounds, there was just, well, have you ever kicked over an ant mound? Like if you're mowing, outside my office window, I'm looking right over there. There's this huge ant mound there. They're trying to stay ahead of the water in recent days. But when you knock that over, the ants just kind of, and they're everywhere. There's just this phonetic energy, right? Well, when you look down at the Western Wall that night, it was like that. There was just this phonetic energy, and the colors and the sounds. The men and the women don't worship together. So the women are separated to their side, and the men are separated to their side. And there's yarmulkes, and there's prayer shawls, and there's horns being blown. It is. And so I reached into my backpack, and I pulled out my prayer shawl and my yarmulke, and I put them on, and I handed it to my father, and I started making my way down the stairs into the sea of humanity. And one of the funny stories my dad likes to share is he wanted to take a photograph or a video of this transpiring. And they take security in Israel very seriously. And on this particular night, in this particular place, the rule was no cinematography. And my father reaches for his phone while a man with an Uzi, a machine gun, looks at him and tells him no. And you know what you do when a man tells you no with a machine gun? Whatever he says. So there is no photographic evidence of this event. So my father sits and watches me as I reach the bottom of the staircase, and I'm immediately drawn into this sea of humanity. And they're singing and they're dancing, and I immediately get pulled into this group, and we're going around and around, and we're singing, and I'm trying to sing. I don't speak much Hebrew, and it's just this joy and this celebration, and I know that my Jewish brothers and I don't see things exactly the same, but there was this love for God, and there was this deep desire to be in this moment, and it was powerful. And as we moved closer and closer to the wall, we began to separate out. And I remember my first opportunity as I walked up to the wall, and I leaned in, and I took my prayer shawl and I placed it over my head, and I pulled it out far enough, and I could lean into the wall, and inside that covering, inside that tabernacle, that tent, it felt like I was the only person in the presence of God. It was powerful. And I prayed, and one of the traditions they have there is you write prayers and you put them between the stones on the wall. And I had some prayers specifically that I had written out prior to my going there, and I placed them in the wall. And I thought to myself, I felt so connected to God in being in this place, but at the same time, I felt so insignificant to God. Who am I? Who is Jimmy Vaughn? That God would even take notice of him. Who am I? That not only would he take notice of me, but he would send his son. He would give his son to make me right in seeking a relationship with him. I tell you, that was truly a life-changing experience. I've had the privilege of visiting there again several times. It's one of the musts of being in the ancient city. But the subsequent visits are not on par with the first one. That being said, let me say this. You don't have to go to Jerusalem and stand at the base of the Western Wall to have a life-changing encounter with God. If you'll just open up your heart and lean into him and ask him to allow you to begin to even conceive God for who he really is, to even conceive of Jesus Christ and who he really is, and to even conceive of the death, burial, and resurrection for a sinner like you and me. God had every right to leave me in my sins. He had every right. God has every right to cast me away from him for eternity. He had every right, because that's what I deserved. But God made a way. God made a way. Before I was born, God made a way before I knew him. And God made a way even when I had a head knowledge of God, and not passively, but intentionally and willfully rejected him. God made a way. But in his patience and his grace, January of 1987 came about, where I met Christ on his terms, and it changed every Easter after that. Well, we've spent an hour together, nearly, and I've shared with you the Easter portion of my visit to the Holy Land. I want to give you an opportunity. If you have a question that you would like to ask, you can share it with me, and I would be honored to answer that question. And we'll stay here a few more minutes. I'll answer the questions for sure. I'd love to answer those. But I don't know. Maybe I just wanted the opportunity to walk down memory lane. But I did want the opportunity to share with you some of the meaningful things that Easter is, and the powerful symbols that exist even today, and some of the meaningful places that we can visit and that I've had the privilege of visiting. Are there any questions that I can answer for you guys? If not, we're going to button this thing up because my eyes are starting to sweat a little bit, and I just don't want you to see what will transpire if I sit here and think about it long enough. Well, I hope that you're having a wonderful Easter. And remember, it's not where you are, it's whose you are that makes Easter so special. And I hope that you're sharing your gospel story. Your testimony is one of the greatest tools God has ever given to you to be the hands and the feet, to be the salt and the light to a lost and dying world. They can argue a lot of things. They can argue, is it the garden tomb or the sepulcher? They can argue that. They can't argue your story. This is who I was. This is what I did. This is where I came from. And this is who I'm becoming. You're an expert on you. So you share your testimony to everyone that'll listen and invite them to come and see the empty tomb. And invite them to come and see the risen Savior. I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for giving me extra time on this Easter, especially for those of you that gave me time a little earlier. I love you. I look forward to being with you all again very soon. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful for a life of unexpected and undeserved privileges. And I hope that this is added to your Easter. May the Lord bless you and keep you safe until we can be together again. Have a great and wonderful Easter. Take care.